I'm Alara, 28, female, and my entire world fractured over a glass of Pinot Noir. More accurately, it fractured over the 5 words I said after taking a sip, but the wine felt like the catalyst, the cool liquid courage I needed to finally burn a bridge that should have been condemned years ago. It happened at the climax of the ritualistic Sunday dinner, a weekly performance of familial harmony that always left me feeling hollowed out. The dining room table was, as always, a picture of my mother's aspirations. Polished mahogany, gleaming silverware, and a pot roast that was slightly too dry, surrounded by dutifully prepared but bland side dishes. My father, Ronan, sat at the head of the table, presiding over the meal with the quiet smugness of a man who believed this was all his due. My mother, Celia, sat opposite him, her smile as tight and carefully constructed as her floral centerpiece. And between them, a buffer and a black hole, sat my younger sister, Cora. The conversation had been a minefield of passive aggression. There were the usual subtle digs about my work schedule. "It must be so nice to finally grace us with your presence, Alara," Mom had said as she placed the gravy boat on the table. There were the thinly veiled criticisms of my single status. "Cora's new young man is just wonderful. A real artist," Dad had chimed in, conveniently ignoring that the artist had been unemployed for 6 months. I had weathered it all with the practiced ease of long experience, offering noncommittal hums and polite smiles. For years, this had been my role, the quiet, successful, and emotionally distant older daughter, the one who paid for the stage on which they all performed. I was the family's bedrock and its ghost, my financial support a constant, comforting presence, while my actual presence was an inconvenience to be remarked upon. The tipping point came with the wine. Mom lifted her glass, a theatrical gesture that commanded the room's attention. Her eyes, which held a familiar glint of martyrdom, settled on me. "I'd like to make a toast," she announced. Ronan's lips curved into a smirk. He knew what was coming, he was in on the joke. "To our silent investor, always paying, never present." The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Investor. Not daughter, not family, but a financial instrument. It was meant to be a jab, a guilt-inducing reminder of my perceived absence. But all it did was flip a switch inside me. A switch that had been installed years ago, built from 1,000 slights, 1,000 moments of being made to feel like a walking, talking ATM. The dry pot roast, the condescending questions, the years of blatant favoritism, it all coalesced into a single, crystalline moment of clarity. They didn't see me. They saw a resource. I picked up my own wine glass, the stem cool against my fingers. I met my mother's gaze, then my father's. His smirk was unwavering. I took a slow, deliberate sip of wine, letting the tartness wash over my tongue. Then, I placed the glass back on the table with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "To the investor," I said, my voice even and cold, "who just pulled every cent out of your shared account." The effect was instantaneous and deeply satisfying. My father's smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. My mother's face went pale, her perfectly applied lipstick suddenly looking garish. But the best reaction was Cora's. She made a sharp, sputtering sound, her eyes wide with panic as she choked on a mouthful of mashed potatoes. I didn't wait for the fallout. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I smoothed down my blouse, a picture of calm I did not entirely feel. "Dinner was lovely," I said to the stunned room. And then I turned, walked out of the dining room, down the familiar hallway, and out the front door into the cool evening air, not once looking back. The click of the door shutting behind me was the most liberating sound I had ever heard. This explosion wasn't born in a vacuum. It was the final eruption of a volcano that had been dormant for 2 decades. The signs had always been there, clear as day, but I had chosen to ignore them, to explain them away with the desperate logic of a child who wants to believe she is loved equally. The first major tremor happened when I was 17. I had worked for 2 years at a local grocery store, bagging groceries and stocking shelves, meticulously saving every dollar for a beat-up but functional 1998 sedan. I had finally saved the $2,500 I needed. The day I was going to buy it, my parents sat me down at the same dining room table. Their faces were etched with worry. The roof was leaking, they explained. A freak storm had damaged the shingles. They needed the money, just for a few weeks, until the insurance check came in. They promised to pay me back every penny. Being the responsible daughter, I handed over my savings. I wanted to help. I was proud that I could. The roof was fixed, but the insurance check, they later claimed, wasn't enough to cover the deductible. The money was never paid back. A year later, on Cora's 16th birthday, a brand new cherry red convertible sat in the driveway with a giant bow on it. "Every girl deserves a reliable first car," Dad had said, beaming, as Cora screamed with delight. When I quietly asked about my money, my mother told me not to be selfish and ruin my sister's special day. The second, more powerful quake came during college. I was a good student, driven and focused, and I'd gotten into a top university for computer science. But it was expensive. My parents claimed money was tighter than ever. So I worked 2 part-time jobs while carrying a full course load. I lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee. I applied for every scholarship I could find and took out tens of thousands of dollars in student loans. I graduated with honors and a mountain of debt. 4 years later, when Cora was accepted into a private arts college to study communications, my parents made a grand announcement at another Sunday dinner. They were paying for her entire tuition, room, and board. "We want her to be able to focus on her studies and her creativity," Celia had announced, patting a beaming Cora's hand. "We don't want her to start her adult life with the terrible burden of debt." The unspoken comparison hung in the air. The burden that was perfectly acceptable for me to carry was too terrible for my sister. The final, foundational crack in my denial came 5 years ago. I had just been promoted to a senior position at a major tech firm. My salary was substantial, more than my parents made combined. They sat me down again, this time with brochures for retirement communities. They weren't ready to retire yet, they said, but they were worried. They hadn't saved enough. What if there was a medical emergency? What if the furnace broke? They proposed a solution, a joint high-yield savings account. I would contribute a set amount every month, a significant chunk of my paycheck. It would be our family emergency fund. A safety net for them, a way for me to show my gratitude for all they had done. I felt a surge of pride. Finally, I could be the dependable daughter in a way they would truly appreciate. I could provide them with the security they deserved. I set up the automatic transfer that very day. For 5 years, that money flowed from my account to theirs. And for 5 years, they called me their rock, their responsible one. And in the same breath, they would jab me for being always busy, too focused on work, and never present. They made me feel guilty for the very career that was funding their peace of mind, a peace of mind I was now beginning to understand I had purchased at the cost of my own. The drive home was a blur. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, a stark contrast to the icy calm I'd projected as I walked out. The 10-mile drive from their suffocating suburban house to my minimalist city apartment felt like crossing a border into a new country. A country where I was the sole citizen and the laws were yet to be written. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. The silence in my car was absolute. I hadn't turned on the radio. The quiet felt profound, like the deep, ringing silence after a loud explosion. In that quiet, the scene at the dinner table played on a loop in my mind, the shock on my parents' faces, the way Cora's hand flew to her throat. I felt a pang, not of regret, but of something akin to stage fright after a performance. The curtain had fallen. What was supposed to happen now? I parked in my designated spot beneath my apartment building and took the elevator up. As I stepped into my apartment, the serene, orderly space felt like a sanctuary. I had designed it myself to be a refuge from the noise of the world, clean lines, neutral colors, everything in its place. It was the physical manifestation of the peace I craved. I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door and kicked off my shoes. It was only then that I looked at my phone. The screen was a constellation of notifications. 16 missed calls. The log was a frantic tapestry of my family's panic. The first call was from Mom just 2 minutes after I'd left. The second, a minute later, from Dad. Then Cora. Then they started alternating, a desperate digital siege. Then came the texts. Mom, 8:02 p.m. What was the meaning of that, Ilara? Mom, 8:03 p.m. You embarrassed us. You embarrassed your sister. Dad, 8:05 p.m. You better call us back right now. Cora, 8:07 p.m. Cora, 8:08 p.m. Are you okay? What did you mean? Mom, 8:15 p.m. Ilara, this isn't funny. Your father is very upset. You need to fix this. The messages scrolled on, a river of indignation and feigned concern. They weren't asking if I was okay. They were demanding that I undo my actions, that I put the mask back on and return to my designated spot on their stage. I toss the phone onto the couch as if it were hot. I walked to my kitchen, pulled a bottle of water from the fridge, and drank the entire thing standing over the sink. My throat was dry, my heart still beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Just as I was putting the bottle in the recycling bin, my phone buzzed on the couch. It wasn't a call or a text. It was a notification from a different app, one I rarely used with my family. Venmo, you have a new request from Celia last name. My blood ran cold. I walked back to the couch and picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the notification. With a deep breath, I tapped it open. The request was for an obscene amount of money, a 5-figure number that I recognized instantly. It was the exact balance of the joint savings account as of that morning. And below the staggering number was a short, 4-word memo, a pathetic plea disguised as a command. Please undo it. I stared at the screen at those 4 words, and a laugh escaped my lips. It wasn't a happy sound, it was sharp and humorless. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. After years of siphoning my earnings, after insulting me at their dinner table, their solution wasn't an apology or a question. It was a Venmo request. As if this entire emotional, familial betrayal could be solved with a simple digital transaction. Like I'd accidentally bought the wrong brand of milk, and they were asking me to go back and exchange it. This was the final piece of evidence I needed. It was proof that in their eyes, my only function, my only value was financial. My feelings were an inconvenience, my dramatic exit a technical glitch. All they wanted was for me to restore their service. My thumb moved, almost of its own accord. It hovered over the 2 options presented by the app, pay or decline. For a fleeting second, the conditioned guilt of a lifetime washed over me. The desire to make it all go away, to smooth things over, to be the good daughter again. Then I looked around my quiet, peaceful apartment. The life I had built for myself, with my own hard work, my own sacrifices. I thought of the condescending smirk on my father's face. I thought of the word investor. My thumb came down firmly on the red decline button. A confirmation screen popped up. Request from Celia, last name declined. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It felt like cutting the last thread holding a massive weight above my head. I blocked their numbers then. First Mom, then Dad, then Cora. The silence that followed was no longer ringing or empty. It was full. It was the sound of peace. It was the sound of my own life beginning. The explosion at Sunday dinner was not a spontaneous act of rebellion. It was a calculated detonation, the culmination of a week spent in the cold, unforgiving light of financial data. As a data scientist, my job is to find the story hidden within the numbers. I never thought the most devastating story I'd ever uncover would be my own family's. It all began the Monday before that fateful dinner. I was in the middle of a complex project at work, running models and debugging code, when an automated email landed in my inbox. The subject line was innocuous: low balance alert from your family emergency fund. I frowned. A low balance? That shouldn't be possible. My monthly contribution, a direct deposit of $4,000, had gone through just last week. The account should have had a healthy 6-figure balance. I'd made a point of never looking at the balance too closely. Looking felt like a form of mistrust, and I desperately wanted to believe that this arrangement was built on trust. I told myself it was probably a bank error and made a mental note to call my mom later. But the thought nagged at me. It was a loose thread in a perfectly woven tapestry. My professional instincts, the very skills that made me a good investor, kicked in. That evening, after work, instead of calling my mom, I logged into the joint bank account for the first time in over a year. The balance displayed on the screen made my stomach clench. It was under $1,000. My first thought was a surge of panic for them. Was one of them sick? Did the house burn down? Had there been a terrible accident? My mind raced through a Rolodex of catastrophes. I was about to call them, my heart pounding with dread, when my cursor hovered over a different tab. Download statements. Something held me back. A cold, quiet voice of reason. Before you panic, it whispered, get the data. I downloaded the PDF statements for the last 2 years. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at my dining table, and opened the first file. What I found was not a story of emergency, but one of extravagance. It wasn't a single, large withdrawal for a crisis. It was a steady, relentless bleed, a death by 1,000 cuts. I opened a spreadsheet, my fingers moving automatically, creating columns and categories. It's what I do. I bring order to chaos. But this was a chaos I wasn't prepared for. The first category I labeled was rent. There was a recurring monthly payment of $3,500 to a property management company. A quick search of the company name revealed they managed luxury apartment buildings in the city's trendiest district. The same district where my sister, Cora, lived. She had told me she was splitting a small studio with 2 friends. The math didn't add up. This was the rent for a high-end one-bedroom apartment. The second category was travel. There were thousands of dollars in charges to airlines and boutique hotels. A $5,000 charge from a resort in Bali coincided perfectly with the Instagram photos Cora had posted 6 months ago, captioned Wanderlust Blessed. Another $4,000 charge for flights to Paris matched her spontaneous birthday trip last spring. My parents had told me they'd pitched in with their credit card points to help her out. The third category was automotive. A one-time payment of $8,000 to a luxury car dealership from 8 months ago. I remembered the day Cora had called me, ecstatic, to announce that she'd gotten an amazing deal on a down payment for a brand new SUV. She needed a reliable car, she'd said, for her influencer work to get to photo shoots. The spreadsheet grew, a monstrous ledger of their deceit. There were weekly charges from restaurants where a single meal costs what I used to live on for a week in college. There were endless purchases from designer clothing stores, high-end electronics shops, and exclusive spas. I sat there, staring at the numbers, and I felt a profound, soul-crushing foolishness wash over me. The family emergency fund was a lie. It was Cora's lifestyle fund. It was my parents' slush fund to indulge their favored daughter and maintain a facade of upper-middle-class comfort they couldn't afford. The most painful part was cross-referencing the dates. A $500 charge at a Michelin-starred restaurant on the same day my mom had called me to complain about the rising price of groceries. A $2,000 purchase at a designer handbag store the same week my dad had mentioned they had to dip into their savings to fix the lawnmower. Every complaint, every worried phone call, every sigh about how tight things were, it was all a lie. A carefully constructed narrative designed to keep me pouring money into the account, while simultaneously making me feel too guilty to ever question where it was going. The jabs about me being never present weren't about my physical absence. They were a tool of manipulation. They kept me on the defensive, eager to prove my worth, my love, through the only metric they seemed to value, my bank account. I didn't cry, the hurt was too deep for tears. It was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I felt like a fool, but beneath the shame, something else was hardening, my resolve. They hadn't just taken my money. They had taken my trust, my goodwill, my love, and they had monetized it. I spent the next 2 days in a state of quiet, focused rage. I ran the numbers. Over the past 5 years, I had deposited a total of $240,000 into that account. They had spent $239,000 of it. On Friday morning, 2 days before the Sunday dinner, I walked into my bank. I sat with a personal banker and explained that I wanted to close a joint account and move the remaining funds into a new, private account under my name only. Because it was a joint account, I had every legal right to do so. The banker was professional and discreet. Within 10 minutes, it was done. The remaining $1,000 was moved, and the family emergency fund officially ceased to exist. Walking out of the bank, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had the data, I had the evidence, and I had a plan. I would go to Sunday dinner. I would sit through their performance one last time, and I would wait for them to hand me my cue. My mother, with her toast, had delivered it perfectly. The Monday morning after the dinner was the first day of my new life. The silence from my family was a thick, unnerving blanket. I knew it was the calm before the storm. Declining a Venmo request and blocking their numbers was merely a declaration of war. It wasn't a defense strategy. And as a data scientist, I knew that a good strategy required expert consultation. My first call wasn't to a friend or a therapist. It was to a highly recommended financial advisor. I explained the situation in cold, factual terms: the joint account, the 5 years of contributions, the systematic draining of funds, and my ultimate withdrawal. They saw you as a revenue stream, not a daughter, the advisor, a sharp woman named Mrs. Davis, said bluntly. Your immediate priority is to build a financial fortress around yourself. We need to assume they will try to find other ways to access your resources. We spent the next hour doing just that. She had me change all my passwords and security questions, some of which, I realized with a sickening lurch, were things my mother would know, like my childhood pet's name or the street I grew up on. We reviewed my retirement accounts, my investment portfolio, and my personal checking account, ensuring they were all ironclad and solely under my control. Mrs. Davis also gave me the name of a lawyer specializing in family financial disputes. You might not need her, she said, but it's better to have a cannon and not need it than to need a cannon and not have one. My second call was to that lawyer, Ms. Albright. I walked her through the story, my voice steadier this time, bolstered by the practical steps I'd already taken. Legally, you are in the clear, Alara, Ms. Albright said, her voice calm and reassuring. A joint account is just that, joint. Any party on the account can deposit or withdraw funds up to the full amount. They had the right to spend it, and you had the right to empty it. It's messy, but it's not illegal on either side. She warned me, however, that the messiness could escalate. They might try to claim you had a verbal contract, that the money was a gift you are now rescinding. They could try to sue you. The thought sent a jolt of fear through me. But, she continued, they would have to prove that in court. It would be very difficult and expensive for them. Your best defense is to cease all direct communication. Do not answer calls, do not respond to texts or emails. If they serve you with legal papers, you send them directly to me. You will not engage. Is that clear? It was crystal clear. It was a lifeline. I wasn't just reacting emotionally anymore. I was operating under the guidance of professionals. I had a plan: document everything, say nothing, build a wall. The process was empowering. With every password I changed and every legal fact I learned, I felt another layer of the old, guilt-ridden Alara sloughing off. That Alara was conditioned to solve her family's problems, to absorb their anxieties, to pay for their comfort. The new Alara was learning to protect herself, to define her own boundaries. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I had blocked their numbers, but I knew they would resort to email. I set up a specific filter in my inbox. Any email from my mother, father, or sister would be automatically archived into a separate folder labeled documentation, bypassing my inbox entirely. I would not be tempted to read them in a moment of weakness. Ms. Albright could review them later if needed. It was a small, technical act, but the relief was immense. I had effectively muted them. The frantic noise of their panic and anger could no longer reach me. For the first time in my adult life, my home, my phone, and my mind were truly my own. The silence they left behind was no longer frightening. It was filled with possibility. I spent the rest of the evening looking up pottery classes, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the time. Or, I was beginning to realize, the emotional energy. 4. I was no longer just an investor in my family's story. I was finally ready to invest in my own. The first week of silence was golden. The second week was when the siege began in earnest. My family, realizing their digital lines of communication had been severed, resorted to more primitive and desperate tactics. Their campaign of escalation proved just how little they understood me and just how far they were willing to go to regain control of their primary asset. The first attack came via a flying monkey, a term I learned from online forums about difficult family dynamics. It was my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister. She called me on a Thursday evening. Unprepared, I answered. "Ilara, honey, it's your Aunt Carol," she began, her voice syrupy with concern. "Your mother is beside herself with worry. She hasn't slept in days. She told me what happened, and I know there must be some terrible misunderstanding." I took a deep breath, clutching the phone tightly. "Aunt Carol, I appreciate you calling, but this is a private matter between me, my parents, and my sister." "But family is family," she insisted, her tone shifting from concern to chiding. "You can't just cut them off. Your mother said you emptied their emergency account. What if something happens? Ronan's blood pressure is through the roof." "The account is closed," I said, my voice firm. "This conversation is over." I ended the call before she could reply and immediately blocked her number. The attempt at emotional blackmail left a sour taste in my mouth. They weren't just fighting for themselves. They were recruiting others, painting me as a cruel, unstable daughter who had abandoned her poor, aging parents. The next escalation was far more brazen. The following Monday, as I was heading out for lunch, the receptionist at my office buzzed my desk. "Ilara, your parents are here to see you." My blood froze. "I'm sorry." "Your mother and father, they're in the lobby. They said it's an emergency." I walked to the large glass windows of my office that overlooked the building's main entrance. And there they were, Celia and Ronan, standing by the security desk, looking impatient and entitled. My mother was clutching a handkerchief. My father was pacing back and forth. They had brought the battle to my doorstep, to my professional sanctuary. This was a line I never dreamed they would cross. Fury, cold and sharp, cut through my shock. I buzzed the receptionist back. "Sandra, please inform them that I am in a meeting and cannot be disturbed. If they do not leave the premises, please call building security." "Of course, Ilara," she said, her voice kind. My boss, who had overheard, came to my office door. "Everything okay?" he asked. I simply nodded, unable to speak. He had always been supportive, and I was grateful he didn't press. I watched from my window as Sandra spoke to them. My mother began to cry, dabbing at her eyes with the handkerchief in a display of performative grief. My father's face turned purple with rage. He started arguing with the security guard who had calmly approached them. A few moments later, they were being escorted out of the building. My father shot a furious glare up at the wall of windows, as if he could see me watching. The humiliation of it all was secondary to the chilling confirmation of their desperation. They had no boundaries. The final phase of the attack was a coordinated campaign of guilt. Emails, which I wasn't reading but could see piling up in the documentation folder, now arrived from cousins, old family friends, and even Cora's on-again, off-again artist boyfriend. They also found a loophole: my work email. One email from Cora slipped through my personal filters. The subject was "Please, Ilara." Against my better judgment, I opened it. "I don't understand why you're doing this," it read. "Mom and Dad are a wreck. They had to cancel their trip to the lake house. I might have to move out of my apartment. You've always been the strong one, the one who took care of things. Why are you being so selfish now? You have so much, and we just needed a little help. You're tearing this family apart over some money." I stared at the words, my heart a block of ice. Over some money. She truly didn't get it. She couldn't see that she was living a life funded by my sacrifice, a sacrifice I had made willingly, until I learned it was built on a foundation of lies. She saw my money as a collective resource she was entitled to, and my refusal to share as a personal failing. I took a screenshot of the email, saved it to a secure folder, and then deleted it. I forwarded the message to Ms. Albright with a single sentence. "This is the kind of thing I'm dealing with." Her reply came within the hour. "This is good, Alara. This is evidence. They are building my case for me. Stay strong." And I did. Every desperate act on their part chipped away at the residual guilt I felt and replaced it with a resolute certainty. They weren't fighting for me, for our relationship, for our family. They were fighting for their lifestyle, and it was a fight they were going to lose. After 2 weeks of silence on my end and escalating chaos on theirs, I knew I couldn't hide behind my lawyer and email filters forever. The situation was untenable. For my own peace of mind, I needed closure. I needed to face them one last time, not to argue, but to present the immutable truth. I had Ms. Albright send them an official email. It stated that I was willing to meet, but the terms were non-negotiable. The meeting would take place in her firm's conference room. She would be present, and it would be the final time we would discuss the matter of the joint account. They agreed immediately, likely assuming a meeting with a lawyer meant I was ready to negotiate a settlement. I walked into the conference room 5 minutes early. The room was intimidating by design: a long, dark wood table, imposing leather chairs, and a view of the city skyline that made everything on the ground seem small and insignificant. I felt small and insignificant. But as I sat down and arranged my files on the table, a sense of calm settled over me. I had my data. They arrived precisely on time. My father, Ronan, walked in first, his face a mask of stern disapproval. My mother, Celia, followed, looking haggard and drawn, her usual impeccable appearance replaced by an air of weary martyrdom. Cora trailed behind them both, her eyes red-rimmed and fixed on the floor. She wouldn't look at me. They sat opposite me. Ms. Albright sat at the head of the table, a neutral arbiter in this familial war. "Thank you for coming," Ms. Albright began, her tone professional and dispassionate. "Alara has agreed to this meeting to provide clarity on her recent decisions. She will speak, and you will listen without interruption. When she is finished, you will have an opportunity to speak. Are we clear?" Ronan grunted in assent. Celia just nodded, twisting the strap of her purse. I took a deep breath. "I'm not here to argue," I began, my voice clear and steady. "I'm here to show you why I did what I did." I slid the first folder across the table. This is a complete history of the Family Emergency Fund from its inception 5 years ago. Inside were the bank statements, but I had gone a step further. I had prepared a summary presentation, just as I would for a client at work. Total deposits made by me over 60 months, $240,000, I said, pointing to the top line of the summary page. Total withdrawals made by you, $239,078. Remaining balance at the time of my final withdrawal, $922. I saw a flicker of shame in my mother's eyes before it was quickly replaced by defiance. My father simply glared. "I was told this was an emergency fund," I continued, my voice devoid of emotion. I pushed a second file forward. It was my analysis, complete with color-coded charts and graphs. However, my analysis of the expenditures shows no evidence of emergencies. Instead, it shows a consistent pattern of lifestyle funding. I walked them through it, my voice never rising. Category 1, Housing, $3,500 a month for 24 months, totaling $84,000, paid to a luxury apartment building. This appears to be the rent for Cora's apartment. Cora flinched as if struck. Category 2, Travel, over $18,000 spent on flights, hotels, and resorts in locations such as Bali, Paris, and Cancun. These charges coincide with Cora's vacation, photos posted on social media. "We wanted her to see the world," my mother cut in, her voice trembling with indignation. "It's educational." Ms. Albright held up a hand. "Mrs. Last Name, you agreed to listen without interruption." I continued, my gaze unwavering. Category 3, Automotive, an $8,000 down payment on a new SUV for Cora. Category 4, discretionary spending. Over $60,000 at high-end restaurants, designer boutiques, and electronics stores, all while you were telling me how much you were struggling financially. I let the silence hang in the air. The data was irrefutable. The story it told was ugly and undeniable. My father was the first to break. "We are your parents," he boomed, slamming his hand on the table. "We gave you life. This is what children do. They take care of their parents. It's about respect." "Respect?" I asked, and for the first time, a tremor of anger entered my voice. Was it respectful to toast me as a silent investor? Was it respectful to lie to me for 5 years? You didn't ask me to support Cora's lifestyle. You stole the money under false pretenses. You took my desire to help you and you twisted it into a secret allowance for my sister. Finally, I looked at Cora. Her face was streaked with tears. "Cora," I asked, my voice softening slightly, Did you know all of this was coming from my account? Did you know they were lying to me about it?" She looked from my face to our parents, her expression tormented. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Celia shot her a warning look, but it was too late. Cora broke. I knew you were helping out," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "They told me you had plenty of money and you wanted to help. I didn't know it was like this. I didn't know they were telling you they were broke. I thought you knew." And there it was, the final, devastating truth. They had lied to both of us, pitting us against each other in a drama of their own creation. They used my generosity to spoil her and her naivete to conceal their deception. "The money is gone," I said, my voice firm again as I looked back at my parents. "It's not coming back. There will be no more joint accounts. There will be no more monthly transfers. That part of our relationship is over." I stood up. "I am your daughter, not your bank. If we are ever to have a relationship again, it will be based on honesty, nothing else." I gathered my files, gave a small nod to Ms. Albright, and walked out of the conference room without a backward glance. The weight that lifted from my shoulders was so profound I almost felt dizzy. It was over. The data had set me free. The weeks following the confrontation were characterized by a deep and profound silence. It was not the tense, angry silence of before, but a hollow, echoing one. The war was over, and the dust was settling on a new, barren landscape. My parents made no attempt to contact me, and for that I was grateful. According to Ms. Albright, they had accepted defeat. The undeniable proof I had presented left them with no ground to stand on. The first tangible sign of change came about a month later. A realtor's sign appeared on the front lawn of my childhood home. They were selling the oversized house they could no longer afford without my subsidy. Seeing a photo of it online felt strange, like looking at a museum exhibit from a life that was no longer mine. They downsized to a small condo an hour away, and the move seemed to finalize the fizzy and emotional distance between us. Life moved on. I leaned into the newfound freedom. I enrolled in the pottery class I had looked up, and discovered a surprising talent for shaping clay into something beautiful and whole. My hands, usually tapping away at a keyboard, found a new language in the spinning wheel. I started traveling, not to the lavish resorts my family favored, but to places I had always wanted to see. I hiked in national parks, explored historic cities on foot, and ate at small, local cafes. I was funding my own joy, and it felt more valuable than any five-star hotel. I was, for the first time, truly present in my own life. The most unexpected development came from Cora. About 3 months after our meeting at the lawyer's office, a letter arrived at my apartment. It was not an email or a text, but a physical letter, handwritten on simple stationery. "Ilara," it began. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need to apologize. You were right. I was living in a fantasy world, and I never stopped to question where the magic was coming from. It was easier to believe that I deserved it all. Seeing those bank statements was the most humiliating moment of my life. I was so angry at Mom and Dad for lying to me, but I was mostly ashamed of myself for being so willfully blind. I've moved out. I have a tiny apartment now, and I'm working as a waitress to pay my bills while I try to figure out what I really want to do. It's hard, but it's real. Thank you for showing me the truth, even though it hurt. I hope one day we can be sisters again. Chorus. I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the ink. It was the apology I never knew I needed. It wasn't an excuse or a justification, it was an acknowledgement of the truth. I waited a week, then I sent her a text. Coffee. We met at a neutral cafe halfway between our apartments. She looked different, thinner, perhaps, and tired, but her eyes were clear. The entitled softness was gone, replaced by a new, hard-won maturity. We didn't rehash the past. We talked about her job, my pottery class, the funny things our cats did. It was awkward and stilted at first, but by the end of the hour we were laughing. It wasn't a full reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning. It was the first brick in a new foundation, one built on the solid ground of reality. As for my parents, I hear about them occasionally through Cora. They are bitter. They tell their remaining friends that their eldest daughter abandoned them. They may never understand or forgive me for taking away the comfortable life they felt they were owed. And I have come to accept that. Sometimes I think about that final Sunday dinner. That toast, meant to wound me, was actually a gift. It was the moment the truth was finally spoken aloud, giving me the permission I needed to act. They called me a silent investor, and in the end, I did what any smart investor would do. I divested from a bad asset. I walked away from a deal that was costing me my self-respect. Because the most important investment you can ever make is in yourself.